My stepbrother laughed when he inherited the house and the car, while I got Grandpa's old cap soon. That cap made me a millionaire. You ever have one of those moments when your whole life flashes before your eyes? Not because you're dying or anything dramatic like that, but because something so small just yanks you back through time? That's what happens every time I put on my baseball cap. It's just a cheap knockoff Dodgers cap I got for $10 at a gas station. But damn if it doesn't smell exactly like my grandpa's. I'm Roy, 32, living in a small town in Ohio that's so forgettable even people who live here forget to mention it when relatives ask where they're from. My girlfriend Amy and I rent this tiny apartment above a garage that permanently smells like oil and whatever Domino's pizza mechanic had for lunch. It's not much, but it's home. We both work at Uncle Joe's Diner, slinging burgers and mixing milkshakes, while Bruce Springsteen blasts from the ancient radio behind the counter. The place has this neon sign that flickers when it rains, and booths with vinyl seats patched up with duct tape. Classic Americana at its finest, or at least, that's what the tourists who occasionally wander in seem to think. Most nights, Amy and I come home exhausted, collapse on our second-hand couch, and watch Seinfeld reruns until we fall asleep. On weekends, we might splurge on a six-pack of Miller and dream about a future that feels just out of reach. It's not exactly the American dream they sold us on TV, but it's ours. I've always had this crazy idea about opening my own place someday. Nothing fancy, just a spot where I could serve ballpark-style hot dogs with that perfect snap when you bite into them and that special mustard that seems to only exist at baseball stadiums. Amy says I talk about hot dogs like other people talk about fine wine. Maybe that's why I love her. She's got this spark, you know? When she laughs, her whole face lights up, and sometimes I catch her looking at me like I'm something special. Like I'm not just some small-town guy with grease stains on his uniform and ketchup under his fingernails. She believes in me more than I believe in myself most days. Last night, I was practicing new sauce combinations in our tiny kitchen, and she caught me sleeping with the diner's menu under my pillow. "Studying in your sleep again?" she teased. I told her I was trying to absorb the secret to Uncle Joe's special sauce through osmosis. We laughed so hard our downstairs neighbor banged on his ceiling with a broomstick. But yesterday, everything changed. Uncle Joe called us all into the diner after closing time. His face looked like someone had told him the Yankees were leaving New York. He shuffled his feet, avoided eye contact, then dropped the bomb. He's planning to sell the diner to some developer. They want to turn it into a Walmart parking lot. Just like that, our job's about to disappear. My daily routine for the last decade, on the chopping block, the closest thing I had to a safe place since I left home, soon to be gone. I drove home in my beat-up Ford pickup, the one with the tape deck that only plays Van Halen cassettes because it eats everything else. The truck was making that concerning clicking sound again, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was what the hell I was supposed to do now. When life pulls a rug out from under you, it's funny how your mind reaches back to find something stable to hold on to. For me, that's always been baseball and my grandpa. My mom died when I was 3. Cancer. I don't remember her face without looking at pictures, and that makes me feel guilty sometimes. After she was gone, it was just me and Dad for a while, but he was broken in ways I was too young to understand. He went to work, came home, stared at the TV, rinse and repeat. But my grandpa, he was something else entirely. A die-hard baseball fan who'd seen the greats play in person. He had stories about Jackie Robinson that would make your hair stand on end, about how that man changed America one base at a time. Grandpa had this ancient Dodgers cap, faded blue with the white logo barely visible anymore. He'd twist it in his hands before every game we watched together, like he was winding up the universe's luck machine. "This is our lucky charm, boy," he'd tell me, his voice rough from decades of cheering at ball games. "As long as we've got this cap, we're unbeatable." The cap smelled like grass and sweat, the scent of happiness. If you ask me, some of my best memories are sitting in the rickety bleachers of our local minor league team stadium, eating hot dogs, and watching guys who were probably never going to make it to the majors but played their hearts out anyway. Grandpa would let me wear the cap sometimes, and it would fall right down over my eyes. He'd laugh and push it back, telling me I'd grow into it someday. Life's like baseball, Roy. He'd say, you won't always hit, but the important thing is to hold the bat tight. I didn't really get what he meant back then. Now, at 32, staring down unemployment and an uncertain future, I think I'm starting to. Everything changed when I was about 10, and Dad married Linda. She came packaged with Justin, her son from a previous marriage who was 2 years younger than me, but somehow always seemed to be looking down on me. Linda made it clear from day one that I wasn't part of her picture-perfect family plan. She never said outright. She was too smart for that, but it was in the way she'd serve Justin the bigger slice of pizza or how my school achievements mysteriously never made it onto the fridge. Dad, weak-spirited as he was, just went along with it. Peace at any price was his motto, even if that price was his own son's happiness. Instead of standing up for me, he started spending more time at work, leaving me in the emotional crossfire at home. Thank God for Grandpa. His house became my sanctuary, with its worn leather armchair that smelled like pipe tobacco and the constant background noise of baseball games on TV. He taught me to keep score the old-fashioned way, with a pencil and scorecard. He showed me how to spot a curveball before it broke. Most importantly, he showed me what it meant to be steady when the world around you isn't. When I was 14, Grandpa died in his sleep. Heart attack, the doctor said. It was peaceful, they told us, like he'd just decided to slide into home plate one last time. At the funeral, I stood stiff in an ill-fitting suit from Goodwill, trying not to cry because Justin had called me a baby the last time I'd teared up. Dad got Grandpa's Dodgers cap. I wanted it so badly it hurt, but I couldn't bring myself to ask for it. Somehow, in the chaos of our blended family life, the cap disappeared. I looked for it for months, checking Dad's closet when no one was home, peering into storage boxes in the garage. Nothing. It was like the last piece of my real family had vanished into thin air. By the time I turned 18, tensions with Linda had reached a breaking point. She'd accidentally thrown out my baseball card collection during spring cleaning, and when I confronted her, things got ugly. Dad took her side, of course. He always did. That night, he told me maybe it was time I found my own place. Not in those exact words. He couched it in talk about becoming a man and spreading my wings, but the message was clear: get out. So I did. With $200 saved from my part-time job at the local movie theater, I rented a room above a laundromat and picked up more shifts at Uncle Joe's, where I'd been washing dishes on weekends. That's where I met Amy. She was a waitress with community college degree in art history and dreams of seeing Paris someday. We bonded over late-night cleanups and shared plates of leftover fries. She moved in with me a year later, and we eventually upgraded to our current place above the garage. Not exactly climbing the social ladder, but at least the laundromat's constant humming was replaced by the occasional sound of a car engine being revved. Progress, I guess. Uncle Joe's became my de facto family. Joe himself reminded me of Grandpa sometimes. Gruff exterior, heart of gold, always ready with advice nobody asked for, but everyone needed. He let me learn the grill, taught me his secret recipes, showed me how to manage inventory and deal with suppliers. Without realizing it, I was getting a crash course in running a diner. Amy and I would stay up late sometimes, sketching out plans for our own place on napkins. Roy's dogs. She'd write in looping letters, drawing little baseball bats around the name. I'd laugh it off, but secretly, I'd save those napkins in a shoebox under our bed. A man who doesn't read good books has no advantage over the man who can't read them at all, Mark Twain supposedly said. I don't read many good books. Never been much of a reader. But I read menus and I dream. Not sure what Twain would make of that. Over the years, I bought a few baseball caps, trying to recapture something of Grandpa's magic. None of them ever felt right until I found this knockoff Dodgers cap at a gas station last month. It's nothing special, made in China, probably, but something about the shade of blue and the feel of the bill in my hands. It's the closest thing to a time machine I've ever found. Today, after Uncle Joe's announcement, I came home and placed the cap carefully on our kitchen table. Amy was at her sister's place, so I had the apartment to myself and my thoughts. I heated up leftover Dunkin' Donuts coffee in the microwave and made myself a stack of pancakes with maple syrup. My go-to comfort food, since Grandpa used to make them for me on Sunday mornings before games. I was sitting there, syrup congealing on my plate, trying to figure out what comes next when the phone rang. Not many people call our landline. We keep it mostly because the cell reception in our apartment is garbage. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was Grandpa's baseball instincts kicking in. Never let a ball go by if you can help it. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder while I rinsed my plate. "Roy." The voice hit me like a fastball to the chest. Linda, my stepmother. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 15 years. "It's about your father. He's in the hospital. He asked for you. You better come. Now." I stood there frozen, holding my cheap Dodgers cap in one hand and the phone in the other, my heart pounding in my chest like I'd just stolen home plate. What the hell would I say to my father after all these years? What could possibly bridge that gap? As I hung up the phone, I caught myself twisting the cap in my hands, just like Grandpa used to do, looking for luck or courage, or whatever magic might be stitched into the fabric. One thing was clear. I was about to step up to a plate I'd been avoiding for a very long time. The old Ford pickup protested with a grinding noise as I turned the key, like it was just as reluctant to make this journey as I was. 3 tries later, the engine finally caught, and Johnny Cash's gravelly voice filled the cab from the only cassette that still worked in my ancient tape deck. "God's Gonna Cut You Down" seemed like a fitting soundtrack for driving to see my dying father after 15 years of silence. Rain pattered against the windshield as I merged onto the highway. My knockoff Dodgers cap sat on the passenger seat like a reluctant co-pilot. I grabbed it without thinking, a security blanket I wasn't ready to admit I needed. Maybe some part of me hoped it would give me the courage to face what was coming. The wipers squeaked across the glass, marking time with the rhythm of the rain and Cash's somber warnings. I couldn't help but think about the last time I'd seen my father. I was 18, standing in our driveway with a duffel bag at my feet, too angry and hurt to cry. He'd watched from the doorway, Linda's hand on his shoulder, neither stopping me nor asking me to stay. It's funny how your mind digs up the worst memories when you're already feeling low. As the miles rolled by, I remembered my 12th birthday. Dad had promised to take me to see the Yankees play. I'd been counting down the days for weeks, had the date circled in red on my dinosaur calendar. The morning we were supposed to leave, Justin came downstairs with a brand new Schwinn bike, chrome gleaming in the sunlight from the kitchen window. "Change of plans, sport," Dad had said, not quite meeting my eyes. Justin needed a new bike for school. "We'll catch the game another time." That another time never came, just like all the other promises that evaporated like morning dew on a hot day. The hospital parking lot was half empty when I pulled in, the spaces closest to the entrance reserved for staff and emergency vehicles. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, Johnny Cash having given way to silence. What was I supposed to say to him? What could possibly bridge 15 years of nothing? The hospital corridors smelled like they always do, disinfect and try and mask the underlying sense of sickness and fear. A nurse directed me to room 317, her expression softening when I mentioned my father's name. Not a good sign. He looked small in the hospital bed. That was my first thought. My father had always seemed larger than life when I was a kid. Not a big man physically, but he filled rooms with his presence. Now he was gray and shrunken, tubes connecting him to machines that beeped and hummed, keeping track of the life that was slowly draining out of him. Linda was there, seated in a vinyl chair by the window. She looked older, lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before, but still put together in that way she always managed. Perfect hair, subtle makeup, clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She nodded stiffly when I entered, but didn't speak. Dad's eyes fluttered open as I approached the bed. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. Then recognition dawned. "Roy," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You came." I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. What do you say to the father who chose his new family over you? To the man who let you walk away without a fight? I need to say some things, he continued, each word an effort. I was wrong. I wasn't the father you deserved. I wasn't like your grandfather. I stood there, hands shoved in my pockets, feeling the weight of all our unspoken history pressing down on me. I wanted to be angry, to tell him exactly what his choices had cost me. But looking at him, I couldn't summon a rage that had kept me warm on so many cold nights. It's okay, I said finally, though we both knew it wasn't. He died 3 days later, while I was getting coffee from the vending machine down the hall. The doctor said it was peaceful, that he probably didn't feel any pain. I nodded like that made a difference. The funeral was small. A few colleagues from the insurance company where he'd worked for 30 years, some neighbors, Linda's friends who came to support her. Justin flew in from Chicago, where he'd been climbing the corporate ladder at some tech firm. He looked at me with the same mixture of disdain and pity he always had, like I was some stray animal his mother had reluctantly allowed into the house. I stood at the back during the service, uncomfortable in my one dress shirt that I usually save for job interviews. Amy had offered to come with me, but I'd told her to stay home. This wasn't something I wanted to share with her, this glimpse into the life I'd left behind, the family that had never really been mine. A week after we put my father in the ground, Linda called. We're doing the state division on Saturday, she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. 2:00. Don't be late. I almost didn't go. What could there possibly be for me in that house? But curiosity got the better of me. Maybe there would be something of my grandfather's that Dad had kept. Something small I could take to remember the man who'd actually loved me. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The blue paint on the shutters faded. The front lawn not as well kept as it had been when I lived there. Inside, though, it was just as I recalled. Linda's domain, with its carefully coordinated furniture and the ever-present smell of Febreze lavender air freshener that she sprayed obsessively. Justin was sprawled on the old couch, the one with the ketchup stain on the armrest from when we'd had a food fight as kids, and then frantically tried to clean it up before Linda got home. He had a can of Dr. Pepper in one hand and his iPhone in the other, barely looking up when I walked in. Let's get this over with, Linda said, leading me to the dining room where a stack of papers lay on the polished oak table. Justin gets the house, of course, and your father's car. The life insurance policy names him as beneficiary, and the savings account will go to cover any outstanding medical bills, with the remainder going to Justin as well. I nodded, not surprised. I hadn't expected anything, really. Is there? I hesitated, hating how small my voice sounded. Is there anything I could have? Just something to remember him by. Linda's mouth tightened into a thin line. You can check the garage if you want. There's some old junk in there he never let me throw out. Take whatever you want from that pile. The garage was dusty and dim, a graveyard for broken appliances and sports equipment from another life. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a mildewed golf bag, was a cardboard box labeled Dad Stuff, in my father's neat handwriting. My heart quickened as I knelt beside it. Inside were old photos, a few baseball programs yellow with age, a watch that no longer worked. And there at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic shopping bag, my grandfather's Dodgers cap. I pulled it out with shaking hands, hardly believing what I was seeing. The faded blue fabric, the white logo, the sweat stains on the brim. It was exactly as I remembered. I'd spent years looking for this cap after Grandpa died, convinced it had been thrown away or lost in a move. And here it was, preserved like a time capsule from my childhood. I was so transfixed that I didn't hear Justin enter the garage until he snorted with laughter. Is that what you're getting sentimental over? A dirty old hat. I clutched the cap tighter, not trusting myself to speak. Justin sauntered over, towering over me as I knelt on the concrete floor. Man, you really are pathetic. Dad leaves me everything worth having, and you're excited about some piece of trash. Before I could react, he snatched the cap from my hands. I lunged to my feet, but he danced backward, dangling it just out of reach like we were kids again, and he was playing keep away with my homework. Justin, give it back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It was my grandfather's. His smile widened, mean and calculating. Oh, now I get it. This is a famous lucky cap, right? The one Grandpa used to wear to all those loser minor league games. He whistled sharply, and his yellow Labrador came bounding into the garage, tongue lolling. "Buddy, look what I've got for you, boy. A new toy." I watched in horror as Justin tossed the cap to his dog. Buddy grabbed in his jaws, tail wagging furiously as he shook his head from side to side, treating my grandfather's legacy like a chew toy. "No!" I shouted, diving for the dog, but Buddy thought it was a game. He tore around the garage, knocking over a stack of paint cans, the cap clenched firmly between his teeth. Justin laughed, pulling out his iPhone to record the whole thing. This is gold. My brother fighting a dog for a dirty hat. It'll go viral for sure. I finally cornered Buddy against a workbench, prying the now muddy, drool-soaked cap from his jaws. The lab whined in disappointment, looking for me to Justin for guidance. "Good job, Buddy," Justin called. "Now fetch." He grabbed the cap from my hands and threw it with all his might. I watched in dismay as it sailed through the open garage door and into the backyard, landing in the branches of the old apple tree where we'd built a treehouse as kids. "Oops." Justin smirked, still filming. "Better go get your treasure, bro." I stood there, chest heaving, torn between punching Justin in his smug face and retrieving my grandfather's cap. The cap won out. It always would. "You're just like your father," Linda called from the back door as I climbed the gnarled branches of the apple tree, chasing after worthless junk while ignoring what really matters. I didn't respond, focusing instead on not falling as I reached for the cap wedge between two branches. My foot slipped on the rain-slick bark, and for a moment I dangled precariously 10 feet above the ground. If I fall, bury me with this cap, I muttered to myself, a gallows humor joke that no one else could hear. Finally, my fingers closed around the fabric. I tucked it into my jacket and climbed down carefully, ignoring Justin's disappointed expression that I hadn't provided him with crash footage for his social media. I walked straight to my truck without another word, the cap clutched to my chest like something precious. It was only when I was miles away, the house and all its memories receding in my rearview mirror, that I allowed myself to really look at what I'd recovered. The cap was filthy, mud from the dog's paws, drool soaking to the fabric, a new tear along one seam. But it was still my grandfather's cap, the one he'd twisted in his hands before every game, the one that smelled like grass and sweat and happiness. When I got home, Amy was waiting, concern etched on her face. She'd been worried, she said. I'd been gone for hours with no word. I showed her the cap without explanation, and somehow she understood. She always does. "Let me clean that for you," she said, taking it gently from my hands. It looks like it's seen better days. I sat at our kitchen table, watching as she carefully scrubbed the fabric with a soft brush, treating it with more reverence than it probably deserved. This was why I loved her, because she could look at a dirty, torn baseball cap and see what it meant to me without having to ask. "There's a rip in the lining," she said after a while, turning the cap inside out to show me where the fabric had separated from the bill. "I could sew it for you, but you might want to check if there's anything inside first. Sometimes things slip in there." I took the cap from her, running my finger along the tear. Something crinkled under my touch. Paper tucked between the lining and the outer fabric. Carefully, I widened the tear, peering inside. "There's something in here," I said, voice barely above a whisper. Using a butter knife from the drawer, I gently worked the paper free. It was yellow with age, folded multiple times to fit in the small space. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it on the table. It wasn't paper. It was a ticket stub. April 15th, 1947. Ebbets Field, Brooklyn. The date jumped out at me immediately. Jackie Robinson's debut with the Brooklyn Dodgers. The day he broke baseball's color barrier. An actual ticket from that historic game. But what made my breath catch was a signature scrawled across the bottom. Jackie Robinson. In real ink, not printed. "Grandpa, you left me more than fabric," I whispered, tracing the signature with a fingertip. Amy leaned over my shoulder. "Is that what I think it is?" I nodded, unable to find words. My grandfather had hidden this treasure inside his beloved cap. keeping it safe all those years. Had he meant for me to find it someday? Or had it been his secret, a tangible connection to a moment in history that he'd witnessed firsthand? I spent the rest of the evening at our ancient laptop, Googling Jackie Robinson debut ticket, with shaking hands. Amy brought me a bowl of Kraft mac and cheese, my comfort food, and sat beside me as pages loaded. We didn't have the fastest internet, but it was enough to confirm what we were seeing. "Roy," Amy whispered, pointing at the screen, "a similar ticket sold last year for $3.2 million. I looked at her, then back at the ticket carefully laid out on our kitchen table. If this is real, Amy, we could change everything. The thought was dizzying, terrifying. But was it authentic? And what would happen if Linda found out? 2 days after finding the ticket, Amy and I were on a Greyhound bus headed for New York City. Neither of us had ever been there before. Everything I knew about New York came from movies and TV shows. Towering skyscrapers, yellow cabs honking their horns, hot dog vendors on every corner. The ticket was safely tucked into a plastic folder from Walmart, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper that Amy had insisted on buying. "Better safe than sorry," she'd said, carefully placing our potential fortune between 2 sheets of the paper. "If this thing is worth millions, I'm not taking any chances with it." The bus ride was long and uncomfortable, the seats designed for people considerably shorter than my 6'2" frame. Amy slept with her head on my shoulder, while I stared out the window at the passing landscape, wondering if we were being completely insane. People like us, small-town diner workers from Ohio, didn't suddenly come into millions of dollars. That kind of thing only happened in movies or to people who bought lottery tickets, which I'd always considered a tax on people who couldn't do math. But here we were, bouncing along Interstate 80 with possibly the most valuable thing I'd ever touched tucked into Amy's crossbody bag. I'd done some research before we left, figuring out which auction house would be best for sports memorabilia. Christie's kept coming up, with their fancy offices in Rockefeller Center and their history of record-breaking sports auctions. I'd called ahead, speaking to someone with a British accent who sounded like he was wearing a 3-piece suit even over the phone. He'd been polite but reserved when I explained what I had, probably used to people thinking their junk was worth millions. He'd scheduled an appointment with their sports memorabilia expert for the day after our arrival. We pulled into Port Authority bus terminal just after 11 p.m., both of us exhausted and disoriented by the noise and chaos of Manhattan at night. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed our single duffel bag, and we headed out to find a taxi to our motel. The place we'd booked was in Queens. Far enough from Manhattan to be affordable, but close enough that we could get to Christie's without spending a fortune on transportation. The neon sign flickered erratically, missing the letter E, so it just read Motel in buzzing red light. The lobby smelled like cigarettes and cheap coffee, the kind that sits on a burner all day until it develops a skin. If this ticket turns out to be fake, at least we got to spend a night in luxury for $50. I joked as we entered our room. Amy laughed, but it was a kind of laugh that acknowledged a very real possibility that we were on a fool's errand. The room itself was about what you'd expect for price, a sagging queen bed with a patterned bedspread that had probably been there since the Clinton administration, a TV bolted to the wall, and a bathroom where the door didn't quite close all the way. But it was clean enough, and it had a deadbolt, which was all we really cared about given what we were carrying. Amy bounced on the bed experimentally, making a face at the creaking springs. "I think this mattress remembers the 80s, she said, pressing down with her hand, and watching the depression remain after she removed it. "It probably has stories to tell." "Just don't ask her to tell them," I replied, setting our bag on the wobbly table by the window. "I'm not sure I want to know." We were both too wired to sleep despite the long journey. Amy channel surfed while I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. What if the ticket was real? What if it wasn't? What if it was real, but nobody wanted to pay millions for it? What would we do with that kind of money anyway? Morning came too quickly, sunlight filtering through the thin curtains and the sound of early traffic already filling the air. We showered in the tiny bathroom with its lukewarm water and miniature bars of soap, dressing in the nicest clothes we brought, which for me meant my only pair of khakis and a button-down shirt without any visible stains, and for Amy a simple blue dress she usually saved for job interviews. We stopped at a Dunkin' Donuts for coffee in paper cups and bagels with cream cheese, eating as we walked to the subway station. I clutched Amy's bag, now containing our precious cargo, like I was afraid it might sprout wings and fly away. The Christie's building was intimidating, all glass and polished stone, a temple to wealth that made me acutely aware of my scuffed shoes and the coffee stain on my sleeve that I tried to hide with water, only making it worse. The receptionist looked at us with barely concealed suspicion when we explained our appointment, but eventually directed us to a waiting area with leather chairs that probably cost more than my truck. A tall man in a tailored navy suit eventually emerged to greet us, introducing himself as Mr. Harrington, their sports memorabilia specialist. He led us to a small examination room with bright lights and a large table covered in what looked like black velvet. "So, you believe you have a ticket from Jackie Robinson's debut game?" he asked, his tone professionally neutral, neither believing nor disbelieving. I nodded, suddenly too nervous to speak, and Amy produced a folder from her bag. Mr. Harrington donned white cotton gloves before carefully opening the folder and removing our acid-free, tissue-wrapped treasure. His expression remained unchanged as he gently unwrapped the ticket from protective paper and placed it on the table. He produced a magnifying glass and several other tools I didn't recognize, examining the ticket from different angles under the bright light. "The initial examination will take some time," he explained. "We'll need to authenticate the paper, the printing methods, the signature, everything. It could be several days before we have a definitive answer." We left the ticket with Mr. Harrington, signing several forms and receiving a receipt in return. Walking out of the Christie's building felt strange, like we'd left part of ourselves behind. For better or worse, our future was now in the hands of experts who would determine if our hopes were founded or foolish. With 3 days to kill in New York, while waiting for the verdict, Amy and I played tourist on a budget. We walked through Central Park, visited the outside of famous landmarks we couldn't afford to enter, and ate street hot dogs that reminded me of my dream for the diner. At night, back in our motel room with its humming mini fridge and occasional cockroach sightings, I told Amy stories about my grandfather and his love for baseball, how he'd wear his Dodgers cap to every minor league game, no matter who was playing, how he'd buy me a hot dog and a soda, even when money was tight, how the stadium would fill with the smell of popcorn and peanuts, and vendors would call out their wares like carnival barkers. "My grandpa used to tell me that Jackie Robinson was like Superman from the comics," I said, lying next to her on the lumpy mattress. "But better because he was real, a man who changed the world by playing a game and refusing to let anyone stop him." On the third day, we returned to Christie's, both of us too nervous to eat breakfast. Mr. Harrington met us in the same examination room, his expression carefully neutral as before. "We've completed our authentication process," he said, gesturing for us to sit. "I have to tell you." He paused, shuffling some papers, and I felt my heart sink. This was it, the part where he told us it was a clever fake, or damaged beyond value, or "the ticket is authentic, as is the signature." I almost fell off my chair. Amy grabbed my arm so hard I knew I'd have bruises, but I barely felt it. "The condition is remarkable given its age," Mr. Harrington continued, warming to his subject now. "The signature is verified as Jackie Robinson's, likely obtained at the game itself. Based on recent auction results for similar items, we would estimate its value between $4 and $6 million. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I heard the words but couldn't quite process them. For the $6 million. For a piece of paper my grandfather had hidden inside a baseball cap. "Of course, an auction is never certain," Mr. Harrington cautioned, misreading my stunned silence as disappointment with the valuation. "It could go higher, potentially much higher given the historical significance. Or it could sell at the low end of our estimate. We simply can't guarantee results." I nodded dumbly. Even the low end, for million, was so far beyond anything I'd ever imagined having that it might as well have been $1 billion. "There are some considerations you should be aware of," he continued. "The IRS will take a significant portion as capital gains tax. Our commission is 20%, and you'll want to speak with a legal expert about any potential ownership claims." That last part snapped me out of my daze. "Ownership claims?" Yes, if there's any question about your right to sell the item, if family members might contest your ownership, for instance, it could complicate matters considerably. Amy and I exchanged glances. Linda and Justin hadn't known about the ticket hidden in the cap. If they found out now, if they realized what I'd walked away with, we should definitely speak with a lawyer. Amy said firmly, "Is there someone you'd recommend?" The next week passed in a blur of meetings with lawyers, tax specialists, and auction house representatives. The ticket remained in Christie's secure storage while we navigated complexities of suddenly being millionaires in waiting. We moved from the motel to a slightly less depressing hotel, though still nothing fancy. Both of us too superstitious to spend money we didn't technically have yet. The lawyer's advice was clear. Keep everything quiet until after the sale. The fewer people who knew about the ticket, the better, especially family members who might claim a right to it. But it was in my grandfather's cap, I argued. He clearly meant for me to have it. Intent is difficult to prove posthumously, the lawyer explained patiently. And without a will specifically mentioning the ticket, any family member could make a claim. Your best strategy is discretion until the transaction is complete. So we kept quiet. We didn't call home. We didn't post on social media. We lived in a strange limbo, potentially rich but still eating Subway sandwiches and counting our remaining dollars. The auction was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, a special sports memorabilia event featuring several other high-value items. Christie's had marketed our ticket heavily, highlighting its historical significance and excellent condition. Still, nothing prepared us for what happened that day. Amy and I sat in the back of the auction room, holding hands so tightly our knuckles were white. The auctioneer, a distinguished older gentleman with a British accent, introduced the ticket with appropriate gravitas, emphasizing its connection to one of the most important moments in American sports and civil rights history. The bidding started at $1 million and quickly escalated, mostly between phone bidders and Christie's representatives standing in for anonymous clients. The numbers climbed so rapidly I could barely keep track. 2 million, 3 million, for million. Each increment represented more money than I'd ever expect to see in my lifetime. When the hammer finally fell at $5.8 million, the room broke into applause. Amy was crying silently beside me, tears streaming down her face. I felt numb, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Afterward, in a private room with the Christie's executives, reality began to set in. After their commission and estimated taxes, we would walk away with approximately $4.1 million. The money would be held in escrow for 30 days, then transferred to a bank account we needed to set up. "Congratulations," Mr. Harrington said, shaking my hand. "You've made auction history today." The bus ride back to Ohio was surreal. We sat in the same uncomfortable seats, past the same monotonous landscape, but everything had changed. We were millionaires now, or would be in 30 days. The weightiness of that fact pressed down on me like a physical force. "What are we going to do first?" Amy asked softly, her head on my shoulder just like on the journey out. I didn't hesitate. "By Uncle Joe's." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "I was hoping you'd say that." The 30 days crawled by. We returned to work at the diner as if nothing had changed, serving burgers and mixing milkshakes while carrying a secret that sometimes felt like it might burst out of my chest. Uncle Joe was still moving forward with his plans to sell to the developer, though the paperwork was dragging. When the money finally hit our account, a number with 7 digits that looked like a mistake every time I checked the balance, we asked Uncle Joe to meet us after closing time, just like he'd done when he told us about selling the place. "We want to buy the diner," I said simply, watching his bushy eyebrows shoot up toward his receding hairline. "You what now?" he asked, clearly thinking he'd misheard. "We want to buy it," Amy repeated. "We've come into some money. Family inheritance," she added, which wasn't entirely untrue. "We want to keep this place going, but with some changes." Uncle Joe's eyes filled with tears, surprising both of us. I'd never seen him cry in all the years I'd worked for him. "You'd save my soul," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been sick about selling to those corporate vultures. But I didn't have a choice, my sister's medical bills." We worked out the details over the next few days. The price was fair, more than fair, really, but we weren't looking to take advantage of Uncle Joe's situation. He agreed to stay on as a consultant during the transition, teaching us the business side of things that we hadn't picked up as employees. During slow periods of the diner, Amy and I sketched our vision on napkins, just like we used to, but now with the knowledge that these dreams could actually become reality. A retro baseball-themed place, with memorabilia on the walls, neon signs, and vinyl records playing in the background. And at the center of it all, in a special display case, my grandfather's cap. "I'm thinking of calling it Retro Catch," I said, doodling the name in block letters. "What do you think?" Amy smiled, adding little baseball bats to my design. "I think your grandpa would be proud. He always said baseball is when you wait for a miracle, but hold the bat yourself." Looks like we finally got our miracle. I nodded, throat tight with motion. We had our miracle, all right. But more importantly, we had each other in a future that suddenly stretched out before us, full of possibilities. That night, I stood in our apartment, looking around at the shabby furniture and water-stained ceiling. Soon, we'd be leaving this place for a real house. No more listening to mechanics' radio through thin walls. No more saving quarters for laundry. I carefully placed my grandfather's cap on the kitchen table, now clean and restored as best we could manage. The tear in the lining had been repaired. The spot where the ticket had been hidden now empty, but somehow still full of magic. "Thanks, Grandpa," I whispered, "for everything." 6 months can change everything. That's how long it took us to transform Uncle Joe's tired diner into Retro Catch, the baseball-themed restaurant of my dreams. We gutted the place, keeping the bones but replacing just about everything else. The old vinyl booths gave way to custom seating with baseball stitching, the walls now covered with framed photos of baseball legends from every era. And at the center of it all, mounted in a custom display case with museum-quality glass, my grandfather's Dodgers cap with a small plaque that simply read, "Symbol of Faith." Opening day arrived on a perfect spring morning, the kind that makes you think of ballparks and hot dogs and the crack of a bat connecting with a fastball. I stood behind the counter, adjusted my bow tie, Amy's idea, part of our 1950s aesthetic, and surveyed what we created. Neon signs glowed against exposed brick walls. A vintage jukebox stood ready to play everything from Frank Sinatra to Bruce Springsteen, and the smell of fresh burgers filled the air. "You ready for this, Roy?" Uncle Joe asked, clapping me on the shoulder. He'd stayed on as a consultant, though these days he spent more time fishing than working. The sale had given him enough to pay off his sister's medical bills, and buy the cabin by the lake he'd always wanted. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. This was it. The moment I'd dreamed about since I was a kid, watching baseball with my grandfather, eating stadium hot dogs, and believing anything was possible. The first customer started arriving at 11 a.m., and by noon we had a line out the door. Word had spread fast in our small town, partly because we'd hired a local marketing firm to handle our social media, partly because people were curious about what had happened to Uncle Joe's, and partly because, well, news travels at the speed of gossip when you live in a place where the most exciting event of the year is usually the high school football championship. Our signature home run burger, topped with bacon, cheddar, and a special sauce I perfected over years of late-night experimenting, became an instant hit. Families filled the booths, teenagers clustered around the jukebox, and local baseball teams claimed entire sections after their games, still in uniform and full of raucous energy. Amy moved through the chaos with grace, managing the waitstaff and charming customers like she'd been doing her whole life, instead of just stepping into the role of restaurant co-owner. She designed most of the decor herself, finding vintage baseball equipment at estate sales and thrift stores, transformed them into art pieces that gave the place its unique character. By the end of the first month, we'd not only broken even but turned a modest profit. By the end of the third month, food critics from Columbus and Cincinnati had made the trip to try our menu, writing glowing reviews that brought even more customers. A local radio DJ did a live broadcast from one of our booths, interviewing me about the concept while demolishing a grand slam breakfast platter. Sometimes, in quiet moments between the lunch and dinner rushes, I'd look at my grandfather's cap in his display case and feel a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Every time I explained the story to curious customers, Leaving out the part about the multi-million-dollar ticket, of course. I felt connected to him in a way I hadn't since he died. We bought a house with some of the money. Nothing flashy, just a comfortable 3-bedroom with a big yard and no water stains on the ceiling. We invested most of the rest on the advice of the financial advisor we'd hired. For the future, Amy would say with a meaningful look that made me simultaneously terrified and excited, life settled into a new rhythm. Up early to prep the restaurant, home late after closing, collapsing into bed together, tired but content. Sundays were our only day off, spent catching up on laundry and grocery shopping, and occasionally just sitting on our new porch swing, watching the neighborhood kids play street hockey or ride bikes. 6 months after opening, Food Network called. They wanted to feature Retro Catch on one of their shows about unique American restaurants. The segment aired on a Tuesday night, and we closed the restaurant early so the entire staff could watch it together on the big screen TV we'd installed for baseball games. There I was, awkwardly explaining my grandfather's influence while flipping burgers, the cameras zooming in on the Dodgers cap in its case. The next morning, our phone wouldn't stop ringing. Our website crashed from too much traffic. The line of customers stretched around the block. Amy hired 3 new waiters on the spot, and I called Uncle Joe in a panic, begging him to come help in the kitchen. One evening, about a week after the TV spot aired, I was behind the counter refilling napkin dispensers during a brief lull in the dinner rush. The bell over the door jingled, and I looked up to see a face I hadn't seen since the day at my father's house, when I'd rescued Grandpa's cap from the tree. Justin walked in, looking tired and slightly irritated. His tie was loosened, suit jacket slung over his arm, like he'd been driving for hours. He glanced around appreciatively at the vintage baseball memorabilia and neon signs, clearly impressed by the place, but having no idea who owned it. When his eyes landed on me behind the counter, he did a double take. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Not friendly, more like he just found something amusing. He slid onto a stool at the counter, setting his phone down with deliberate casualness. Well, Roy, fancy running into you here, he said, looking around the restaurant again before returning his gaze to me. Waiting tables now, huh? At least it's a step up from Uncle Joe's grease pit. I kept my expression neutral as I grabbed a menu. What can I get you? Just coffee for now, he said, leaning back on the stool. So this is what became of the great baseball dreamer. Slinging coffee in a themed restaurant? Gotta say, I expected you to at least manage your own food truck by now. I poured his coffee without responding to the bait. Justin had always known exactly which buttons to push, and apparently our time apart hadn't changed that skill. Nice place, though, he continued, taking a sip. Great concept. My compliments to whoever owns it. They must be doing well. 3 different people at my conference mentioned this place. He nodded toward the display case with Grandpa's cap. What's with the ratty old hat? Part of the gimmick? It's special to the owner, I said simply, wiping down the counter near him. Justin leaned forward, lowering his voice so only I could hear. So that's the same stupid hat you used to be obsessed with? The one you thought was so magical. He glanced at the display case again. Funny seeing it here. Guess someone thought your little family heirloom was worth displaying. He took a sip of his coffee, his smirk returning. So, what's this place paying you anyway? Better than Uncle Joe's, I hope? 15 years flipping burgers. Man, life really didn't turn out like you planned, did it? So much for that magic cap. Old Pete, a regular who came in every day for the meatloaf special, and had become something of a fixture at the counter, lowered his newspaper and gave Justin a long look. Son, Pete said, setting down his coffee mug with deliberate slowness, you might want to rethink what you're saying. That ratty old hat is in a display case because it's the inspiration for this whole place. He jerked his thumb toward me. And that man you're mocking? He's not just some waiter. Roy OWNS Retro Catch. Been on Food Network last week and everything. Justin stared at me, eyes narrowing. Is that true? I nodded, feeling a calm satisfaction that I hadn't anticipated. Yep, all mine. Well, mine and Amy's. She handles the business side while I run the kitchen. His gaze returned to the display case. So you put that old cap behind glass? His tone was incredulous. But there was something else there, too, a dawning realization that maybe he'd underestimated the value of what he'd once treated so carelessly. The same one you threw to your dog, I confirmed, not bothering to keep the edge out of my voice. Justin's face flushed red. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. How the hell did you afford all this? Did Linda give you money after all? Did Dad leave you something I don't know about? I shook my head, enjoying his confusion. Nope, it was all thanks to this cap. I nodded toward the display case. Turns out Grandpa was right all along. It really is lucky. The luckiest thing I've ever owned. That's bulls. Justin caught himself, glancing around at the families nearby. That's ridiculous. A hat can't buy a restaurant. Where'd you get the money? I just smiled. Let's just say I held on to what was important, even when others treated it like trash. Grandpa always said this cap was special. Guess he was right. Justin stared at me for a long moment, then at the cap, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally a grudging acceptance. He pulled out his wallet, tossed a 20 on the counter for his $3 coffee, and stood up. Mom always said you were more like Dad than you knew, he muttered. Guess she was wrong. As he headed for the door, I called after him. Hey, Justin. He paused but didn't turn around. The hat's magic was real. You just had to believe in it. He shook his head and walked out. Through the window, I watched him get into a BMW that had seen better days, his shoulders hunched as he started the engine. Part of me felt sorry for him, the golden child whose shine had dulled with age, while the cast-off stepbrother had somehow found success. That night, after closing, I poured myself a Coke at the bar and stood looking at my grandfather's cap in its display case. As Yogi Berra said, "It ain't over till it's over," I said to the empty restaurant, raising my glass in a toast to the man who taught me about baseball and life and luck. Amy found me there a few minutes later, wrapping her arms around me from behind and resting her chin on my shoulder. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Carlos told me your brother was an earlier stepbrother," I corrected automatically. "And yeah, everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." She turned me around to face her. "You know what I think? I think your grandfather would be so proud of you, not just for the success, but for how you handled everything, how you never gave up." I nodded, throat tight with emotion. She was right, as usual. 5 years flew by faster than a Randy Johnson fastball. Retro Catch expanded to Columbus, and we were scouting locations in Cincinnati. Our house now had a white picket fence and a real backyard where our twin boys, Jack and Teddy, chased baseballs at each other, their laughter filling the air along with occasional renditions of Sweet Caroline they'd learned from spending time at the restaurant. They were 5 now, bundles of energy with Amy's eyes and my inability to sit still. They'd been bored a year after we opened Retro Catch, turning our world upside down in the best possible way. Neither Amy nor I had siblings we were close to, so having twins seemed like the universe's way of making sure our boys would always have somebody in their corner. One Sunday morning in April, baseball season just getting started, I was making pancakes while Amy read the newspaper at the kitchen table. The boys were in the living room, supposedly playing with their Lego set, but actually using the pieces as projectiles if the sounds were any indication. There was a crash, followed by guilty silence, then the patter of small feet running in different directions. Amy put down her paper with a sigh and went to investigate. I flipped the last pancake onto the stack and followed, expecting to find a broken lamp or maybe a dent in the wall. Instead, it was my grandmother's antique vase, a wedding gift that had somehow survived Justin's childhood only to meet its demise at the hands of my sons. Amy stood in the doorway, surveying the damage as the boys peeked out from their hiding spots behind the couch and under the coffee table. "It was an accident," Jack said quickly. "We were just playing catch," Teddy added, holding up a small foam baseball as evidence. I braced myself for Amy's reaction. The vase had been her favorite piece of home decor. To my surprise, she burst out laughing. "You, too, are just like your dad," she said, shaking her head. "Always aiming higher than you should." After breakfast, I brought the Dodgers cap down from our bedroom where I kept it when it wasn't in its display case at the restaurant. The boys gathered around as I held it carefully, their eyes wide with interest. "This cap belonged to your great-grandfather." I explained, letting him touch the faded fabric gently. He used to wear it to every baseball game he went to. He taught me how to hold a bat, how to keep my eye on the ball, how to love the game. Was he a famous baseball player? Jack asked, clearly hoping for an affirmative answer. No, I chuckled. He was a plumber, but he was the greatest man I ever knew. I told them stories about going to minor league games with Grandpa, about how he'd twist the cap in his hands before every important play, about how he made baseball seem like more than just a game, like a metaphor for life itself. A real man remembers those who gave him wings, I said, repeating something my grandfather used to tell me. The boys nodded solemnly, though I doubted they fully understood. Someday they would. That evening, at our family dinner at Retro Catch, a tradition we maintained even though we could have eaten anywhere. The boys sat in their usual booth, coloring on kids' menus while Amy and I checked in with the Sunday manager. Our Sunday manager, Taylor, was showing us the week's numbers when the door opened, admitting a group of Little League players and their parents. The kids were still in uniform, their faces flushed with either the joy of victory or the sting of defeat. It was hard to tell which. "Table for 12? The coach asked hopefully, looking around the crowded restaurant. "We'll make it work," Amy assured him, signaling the hostess to put some tables together. Soon the place was filled with the sound of excited kids reliving every play of their game, parents ordering burgers and milkshakes, the jukebox playing Glory Days by Springsteen, another tradition we maintained from the early days. Every Sunday, Retro Catch hosted Vinyl Night, where customers could bring their own records to play on our vintage jukebox. It had started as a quirky idea, but had grown into one of our most popular events. Baseball fans would share stories about their first games, their favorite players, their lucky jerseys or hats or rituals. It was community building disguised as a marketing gimmick, and it worked beautifully. Tonight, an older man in a Reds cap approached the counter, with a worn album tucked under his arm. "Been meaning to bring this in," he said, sliding across to me. "Thought it might fit your collection." It was an original recording of "Take Me Out to Ball Game" from the 1950s, the cover showing a cartoon baseball player swinging a bat with exaggerated enthusiasm. "This is amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. "Where did you find it?" "My father's attic," the man replied with a shrug. He collected baseball stuff, too. "Seems like you'd appreciate it more than I would." I thanked him profusely, adding the record to our display shelf behind the counter. Small acts of generosity like this still caught me off guard, reminding me of how far I'd come from the days when every penny was counted and every slight remembered. Later, as the night wound down and the last customers filtered out, I found myself standing in front of the display case holding Grandpa's cap. The plaque beneath it read, "This cap has seen more games than any person alive." I thought about the journey this faded piece of fabric had taken, from my grandfather's hands to my father's closet, to Justin's dog's mouth, to a tree branch, to a display case in a successful restaurant chain, and the hidden ticket that had changed everything, a secret treasure waiting all those years to be discovered. Bruce Springsteen sang about being born to run. I said softly to no one in particular, but I learned sometimes you need to stop and say thank you. Amy came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "The boys are getting restless," she said. "Ready to head home?" Jack and Teddy were at the jukebox, pressing buttons randomly and giggling at the previews of songs that played for a few seconds before cutting off. "Hey, baseball stars," I called. "Time to round the bases and head home." They raced to us, sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, baseball caps, miniature versions of Grandpa's, slightly askew on their heads. Amy straightened Jack's while I picked up Teddy, pretending to stagger under his weight. "Geez, kid, what are we feeding you?" "Bowling balls." He giggled, wrapping his arms around my neck. "Burgers and fries, Daddy." At home, after the boys were tucked in with their baseball-patterned sheets and nightlights shaped like stadium floodlights, Amy and I sat on the back porch, listening to the crickets and enjoying the warm spring night. "You know what I was thinking today?" she asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "What's that?" "This whole story isn't really about the millions." I nodded. She was right. As usual, the money had made things possible, had removed obstacles and opened doors. But it wasn't the heart of the story. It's about the cap, I said. The sweat and the grass and the love stitched into fabric. And about family, Amy added. The one you lost, the one you found, the one we made. I thought about my grandfather, twisting his cap in his weathered hands. About my father, too weak to stand up for me, but trying in his final days to make amends. About Justin, sitting at my counter, humbled by the turn of events. About Jack and Teddy, the next generation of baseball fans, already learning to love the game that had shaped my life. A real man remembers those who gave him wings. I whispered, echoing my earlier words to the boys. In the distance, the faint sound of a baseball game on someone's TV drifted to the neighborhood, the announcer's voice rising with excitement at a crucial play. Some things never change, and for that, I was profoundly grateful.